Hello, everyone. Welcome to Yemidi Media's weekly show, the H panel. The H panel will be talking about today international investigation of crimes and Ethiopia's wars. This is a topic very relevant this week because this is a week where the international human rights experts on Ethiopia, the UN body that was established 2 years ago, was reporting for the second time. And this is a week of to be or not to be for the commission because there are countries and bodies that are advocating for its discontinuation, while many in Ethiopia, especially from the victim side, are asking for extension of its mandate. I'm joined by the full panel today uh, by Dr. Burbridge, Ezekiel Gabisa, and Faisal Robla to talk about this topic, a very important topic. But we will start, as usual, with the first segment of the show, which deals with the highlights of the week, what stood out for each one of them. Welcome, Ezekiel, after so many months of leave of absence, and as well was not here. Faisal has been with us every week we had the show, and welcome everyone once again.
Thank you.
Great. So let's start with what stood out for each and everyone. Maybe because of we haven't had coverage of the humanitarian aspect of this. What Duke has been doing excellently for almost months, or if not over a year. Let's start with that. What stood out for you, Duke, in terms of what you have been observing?
Well, what stood out for me was the first ever medically verified assessment of starvation suspected deaths in Tigray, which was released in part. Most of the findings were released in the last emergency coordination cluster center report that came out, I think, 2 days ago. This was a sophisticated study. This was conducted by medical professionals. The results were reviewed and determined by physicians, a panel of 3 physicians that arrived at their determinations independently. They looked at about 2,600 deaths that occurred, about 2,700 deaths that occurred since the Pretoria Agreement in Tigray, and found that about 1,300 of them, more than 1,300 of them, were due to starvation-related causes. Now, this has been reported fairly widely. You've seen a lot of reports about starvation-related deaths in Tigray. This is the first study that's been systematic, with a rigorous methodology that has looked at why people are dying and determining that they are dying of starvation. We expect that there'll be a report about this coming out at some point. Of course, there's an additional finding there that about 60% of the households in Tigray were experiencing severe or moderate hunger. That's about 25 percentage points up from the level that was experienced during the war. This paints a very bleak picture of what's going on in Tigray right now. And of course, this all comes in the context of the aid suspension that's been ongoing since March. Also reported by the ECC update was that the number of children treated for severe acute malnutrition has declined again in Tigray. Right now it's at about 20% of what it was before the suspension. And of course, it was specifically noted by the World Food Program and USAID that this would not be affected by the suspension. I've been covering this pretty close for TIGAT, and I have a upcoming article coming out this week that's going to focus in on the Northwest zone. If you can see by the chart on the screen, you can see that the availability of this life-saving service, these interventions for severe malnutrition in children under 5, has declined even more in the Northwest zone than the regional average. This is a very, very troubling sign because, of course, this is not an elective procedure. Treatment for severe acute malnutrition is a last stand against child mortality. This is something that they have to be able to provide. Now, they say that there's a problem. When I say they, the World Food Program, the Nutrition Cluster says there's a problem with funding. That explanation does not necessarily hold water because it's uneven the way that it's been, that the level has dropped in Ethiopia since March. It's more severe in Tigray than it is anywhere else, where you would expect the need to be greater. It's more severe in the northwest zone than it is in some other places of Tigray. Although the cuts in nutrition have been felt across the entire region of Tigray, but it's very troubling. And the problem with food distribution, with nutrition distribution, appears they say that there's a funding problem, and there certainly is. It's certainly underfunded. It was funded at about 30% last I checked, but there's also a problem with the way the World Food Program is counting displaced people in the Northwest Zone and probably elsewhere. But just to focus in the Northwest Zone, they only count less than half of the displaced population. According to recent documents released by the World Food Program, this is a big problem. The suspension was on the premise that they were going to do targeting, that they were going to refine the processes, that they were going to get the government out of it, that they were going to do a lot of things to improve. That has to start with them acknowledging their flaws. Now, this 5 months, 6 months of food suspension should be enough time for them to fix their system. But it does not seem like they are focusing on the right things. They're not addressing the problems that are happening inside the World Food Program and some of these aid organizations, and that's a real problem. That's something that's very concerning to me.
Thank you, Drucker, for that important update. Still, welcome once again. Hope you had a great journey wherever you traveled over the past months. So what is the highlight for you over the past week?
Well, for me, it's still connected with the report of the UN Human Rights Commission of Experts on Ethiopia. But we'll get to that later on. By the way, well, I'm sorry that I had to disappear for nearly five months. I was in an area where I could not connect. It's too far away from here, and it will be about 9-8 hours. So by the time that you're on air, I am fast asleep, and I just couldn't make it to show up. And I apologize, but I'm back right now. Now, what stood out for me this week is why the Prime Minister of Ethiopia, who thinks that everything that the human rights investigators and Western governments are doing is to thwart his program, to sabotage Ethiopia, and to badmouth his record on human rights, was not taking the chance to defend his work, his government, and his country in international forums. He had a chance to counter what was said in the report of the ICRE, but he agreed to come and to show up and to defend his country's record, but he did not. He had the chance to appear at other international forums to make a case for his country, but he did not. So that's been a puzzle that was so puzzling me. Why, when Ethiopia, there is a range of issues for Ethiopia, for which the Prime Minister must seek international forums, and seek out international forums to seek assistance for his government's initiatives and to make a case for his actions, whether that is his developmental programs, his economic reforms, alleged economic reforms or his law enforcement ventures into all corners of the country. If there is a legitimate case to be made, why is the Prime Minister of Ethiopia not actually seeking out international fora to make a case for himself? The Ethiopian Prime Minister seems to be avoiding these forums, avoiding where there is accountability. He appears in some forums that he chooses, where he can deliver prepared remarks, rehearsed remarks, but avoids forums where impromptu responses are needed, such as the United Nations, and like this week, the United Nations Higher Commissioner, the session of the Higher Commissioner for Human Rights. So instead of seeking these forums to represent his country, to make representations for his country, the Ethiopian leader have been busy buying PR lobbying firms and PR firms to embellish the image of Ethiopia in the world, and lobby firms to make a case for Ethiopia in Western governments and international organizations. As we know, Ethiopia has been lobbying the UN to kill the Human Rights Commission of experts on Ethiopia when it was established, or since it was established, by seeking premature termination of the UN established body, to thwart the independent investigations of this body by refusing the commissioner's entry into Ethiopia, and to stop the renewal of the mandate last year, I think, when the renewal was up for the mandate was up for renewal after they started work. Why is the Ethiopian government given to these kinds of machinations? Why is it the government, and especially the Prime Minister, not coming to international forums to make a case for Ethiopia if indeed he has a case to be made and actions to be defended? But in each case, wherever the opportunities arose, the government of Ethiopia has refused to engage with international and continental organizations. I think we all remember that the African Commission also had established a human rights investigatory body, but the Ethiopian government refused to engage with it, and finally this foremost human rights body in Africa was eventually forced to disband the body. The Prime Minister had the opportunity to address the UN this month. Everyone comes. He has never showed up here in the last 6 years when he was in power. And he had the chance to address the issue of transitional justice at the UN Human Rights Forum. He was a no-show in both cases. Why is the Prime Minister of Ethiopia not appearing in international forums then? Where others are actually seeking those forums to make a case for their actions, he avoids them. Does he have something to hide? Is he not able to appear and make a case? You know, his predecessors have always used these forums to advance their country's welfare. And they have always been invariably welcomed in international forums. There is a huge reservoir of goodwill for Ethiopia among the international community. In fact, the Emperor of Ethiopia had the credibility to show at the United Nations and even castigate that body for not doing enough and meeting the challenges of the world. And he had no fear of doing so. He was listened to respectfully. The Prime Minister of Ethiopia, the late Prime Minister of Ethiopia, Meles Zenawi, was a compelling voice in international fora, not just for Ethiopia, but also for Africa. And this actually paid off for him in many ways in advancing Ethiopia's cause and improving the image of his country in the eyes of the international community. But the Nobel Prize winning Prime Minister of Ethiopia cannot show up. He was scheduled to talk about transitional justice at the UN HRC session to address this issue of transitional justice, but he did not show up, even after he was scheduled. It just rebuffed and sent his ambassador to speak. I think unless you have something to hide, or you do not have the capability to defend your country, it doesn't make any sense to address these bodies. 6 years in a row, no show at the UN General Assembly. It doesn't make any sense unless there is something that the Prime Minister makes the Prime Minister uncomfortable to represent his country as he is the highest office holder in the country. This has been a puzzling issue for me, and it's connected with the human rights, the UNHRC session this year.
Thank you, Miguel. The image, the footage we are showing is where the Prime Minister, where he was spending while people were expecting him somewhere else in the international fora. Faisal, thank you for coming again. And so what is the highlight for you? And we will start also the topic of the day with you, but first, your highlight of the week.
Yeah, I think my highlight would be brief. And one of these pictures that you are showing is a prelude to what stood up for me this week, which is the war in the eastern part, particularly the war between Oromia and the Somali region. This is the 6th day of that war, and it's not that far from Harar, where the war is taking place. Unfortunately, you showed us one of the pictures as Harar being written. It's about 30-40 kilometers to the east of Harar, where Babili starts, and then the site of the attack of the militia that Shimelis Abdissa is sending to the Somali region, Olechi ID camp, is on that outskirt, not far from what you have seen. As I have shared with you, this press release came from CSC, Congress for Somali Cause, which really took the pain over letting the world know what's happening in this part of the country. That Shimelis Abdissa is unrestrained at all. And yeah, this is exactly what I'm talking about. This is really the juxtaposition between the dream that's empty and the real life that people, both Oromos and Somalis, are living in a particular area. Last week, the highlight of the conflict was a 5-month-old baby who was killed by some of the snipers shooting at the camp. This is an IDP camp that contains to the tune of 120,000 people, less fed by World Food Program and OCHA, less fed. And most of the feeding comes from donations collected from the Somali area. And I think the sad story about the conflict currently in Ethiopia, but particularly between the two brothers and sisters of the Oromo and the Somali community, is this IDP group are victims of the previous debacle that Ethiopia saw in 2016, 2017. Most of these people were dislocated from Oromia when that conflict happened, that almost what you call a near civil war within the entire eastern part of the country. And I think today the war again resumed. Again, a pregnant woman of about 7 months is one of the casualties. Now, I think CSC took really the high ground for very much emphasizing not only the crisis that we are facing, but the potential collaboration that it sees between the Somali and the Oromo, and calling on the Oromo leadership outside the government of Shimelis Abdissa and Prime Minister Abiy to come to recognizing the weight and the gravity of this issue, and called them to stand with the Somalis and as well as with the Oromo masses to really bring this issue into light. Interesting, Getachew, about this conflict is that the Abdissa militia were coming from Harar and Babile, which is to the north of the camp, to the west of the camp, and the Oromo masses in Babile is a divided city. Somali and Oromo, tried to stop the militia, to say, please leave these people alone. They've been our neighbors. They have, have their issues, and they were pushed away by the militia, and really the attack went. So there is some, fishy here as to why a government leader like Shimalis Abdissa would not even listen to the constituency that he theoretically saying he's fighting for whatever the cause. When they're saying, don't get into conflict with our brothers and our neighbors, please stay in your area, and he insists on to fight. What does he want? Is he covering some other issues? Is he trying to really create a fake cause for the Oromo masses who are entangled with the Ethiopian National Defense Force and the Oromia region? These are issues that we really need to investigate. Having said that, I'm afraid that if we don't really stop this conflict, it will again take the image that other conflicts have already shown us, i.e. in Tigray region, in Oromia region, and in Amara, but particularly here, because the east of the region is, back into very unstable areas also, such as parts of Somalia, where Al-Shabaab became more active now than ever before. And as you heard in the news, Al-Shabaab is not only giving headache to Somalia, but they have also killed significant number of Ethiopian forces in the. So I think if you can hear me, Getachew.
Yeah, you were breaking. You're back now. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So this deliberate destabilization of the region is adding more fuel to the fire that we already have. And about 2019, now Ethiopians are talking about the potential disintegration of Ethiopia. By looking at the Somali issue and the challenges that the Somali region had in the past and it's having currently, I wrote an article where I opined that the Ethiopian disintegration is possible. Now you talk about hardliners of Pax Ethiopiana, talking about the potential. They may be using that as a tactic to gain attention, but I was not doing that to gain attention. I was doing to show that this is a potential. And I think I drew 3 scenarios, which I just ended with. The 3 scenarios that Ethiopia can disintegrate if it comes to that point. One would be the Yugoslavia scenario, where multiple states will come out of the Oromia, the Somali state, the Amara, the Tigray. And that has been on the books for a long time. And history of Ethiopia speaks to that scenario in more than one way. The second scenario could be the Russian scenario, where big bulk of Ethiopia that do have historical ties with each other could stay. And I don't even know if that's any more viable, but because of socio-cultural, integration, they could, but regions like Somalia and Afar can easily get out of this if things go. And then the worst case scenario and the ugliest form of disintegration of Ethiopia would be the Rwanda style, where brothers and sisters, neighbors would kill each other. That is the scenario that's now developing, because with Somalis and Eastern Oromia living together for the last 400 years, with Oromo and Amara living together for many, many years, with Tigray and Amara living together with eternity, but not having any meaningful peace, with, Walgait and Tigray hanging on their neck. Nobody can go to bed at night and not think about that ugly scenario where the two can really wipe, when the region can go into the Rwanda. So I take these issues very seriously, and I wrote in 2019 this article, and today a lot of people who are writing about this are coming to this subject as a potential scenario. Thank you.
Thank you, Faisal, for that. I was planning to go to start with you, but maybe let's shift a bit here with your tweet here, and I want to start with this girl. This is a tweet from pretty much what you were saying, Faisal. I'm trying to show that. Yes. So this is where you talk about almost all wars in you start with what is happening in Amhara region with OLA, and with Tigray and so on. For those who think that the Tigray war is over, this is a map I think worth showing, where we have 146 local administrations that are indicated in red in the western, southern, northeastern, and northern Tigray, still under Eritrean and Amhara forces occupation. So the current interim administration of Tigray under Getachew Reda is nowhere to be found there. So we don't know even what people are going through and so on. And we can talk about Wallega, that has been in war for so many years now. And now the Somalia or Eastern Oromia, Amhara region, everywhere, almost under fire. And this is what the UN International Commission of Experts on Human Rights Issues in Ethiopia, the chair had to say this week in Geneva. Let's hear about what he said, and then I will kickstart this topic with Eskia.
What we understand from victims we have consulted widely is that one of the primary drivers of the conflict is impunity. And the Human Rights Council resolution that establishes this mandate speaks about encouraging impunity being directly related to the reoccurrence of atrocity crimes. So I think impunity is essential. But also I think in terms of for Ethiopia, because Ethiopia is saying,
I think this is a very important aspect of what has been going on. But let's go. Let's go. You started with that in your opening remark as well, Gail, about this report, which is around 21 pages, I guess. Yeah, 21 pages. That was the second, maybe, who knows, the final report of this commission. So where are we heading in terms of all this war that is going on, civilians after civilians after civilians suffering, getting killed either by drone, by infantry, all kinds of crimes happening? Let's get.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I can't say with any certainty where we are going. I think Faisal says it's disintegration, and I think that has been the fear even among the international community for a couple of years since the American Secretary of State in Nairobi talked about the possible implosion of the country. Now, if you set aside the economy, the security, and other challenges in Ethiopia and simply focus on the war, no country can take on its constituent regions one after the other, pitting one against the other at what time, and then making peace with another and request them to fight against another region. It just doesn't make sense at all what's going on in Ethiopia. And that's really what I meant when I said, why is the prime minister not answering to the world? If indeed this is all about law enforcement in several regions, when you conclude one, you go to the other and take on the other, then there is a big problem that the government of Ethiopia must explain to the rest of the world. Why one after the other? Let's say it was the OLA in the Oromia region, and the OLA is an outlawed entity, is an armed group, and that's what the government was fighting. In the north, they said that the Tigray People's Liberation Front is the culprit that had attacked the Ethiopian Defense Forces in the northern command. Well, that was the excuse. And now in the Amhara region, the Fano and the Amhara Special Forces have turned against their paramount ally in the war against Tigray and against the OLA in Oromia. And now the government is on a law enforcement mission in the Amhara region. And now, as Faisal is saying, the one region that was not did not have an adjacent border with the Amhara region was the Somali region. After many years of enduring the fury of the Ethiopian government, for many years, the Somali region had a respite, at least for some time. There was really no ongoing war against Somalis for some time. There was just a respite for a brief period of time after the Abdi time and the Ethiopian government defense forces operations in the Somali region for decades. And now the Somali region itself is now sucked into the conflict that is roiling the country. So the Ethiopian government owes explanation to the rest of the world why all regions, or at least not concurrently, but one after the other, are taking up arms against the federal government. It owes explanation. So I cannot say much about what is in store for Ethiopia, but the commission had put this commission, ICRA, had put their fingers on an important issue, which is about the agreement, the cessation of hostilities agreement that ended the Tigray war. What the commission said is that the war in Tigray, the conflict in Tigray, has not ended. Has not ended. The agreement has not resolved the issues that led to the war in the first place and have not returned to peace anywhere. As a matter of fact, the report says that there is a dangerous escalation in Oromia and Amhara region. So there is this issue. There is a political problem that has not been resolved. The Ethiopian government's refusal to acknowledge that there is problems, political problems, that people, opposition parties, groups, and others have political demands of the Ethiopian government. Otherwise, there would be no reason for one region after another taking up arms against the Ethiopian government. So that is the important issue. There is a political problem in Ethiopia. People in different regions have similar problems with other regions, but they also have their own problems, political problems that should be resolved politically. But the Ethiopian government has chosen to use the Ethiopian security apparatus against its own people. And it's untenable that you take on regions one after the other, and the international community simply watches while the Ethiopian government had killed 1 million and more people of its own citizens, and on its way to continue to climb up to 2 million. I think Faisal is right that this is really escalating towards the war of all against all in Ethiopia, but the international community cannot come afterwards, after the killings, after the genocide, and bemoan what had happened. There are all the warning signs that the commission actually cited that is showing that continued conflict in many regions. So there are warning signs is everywhere for not just a violent dissolution of the state, but a bloodshedding of unprecedented proportion.
Oh, did we lose Getachew? Oh, it'll give me an opportunity to just piggyback on what you just said while he's going. That's what I can't understand about the U.S. position and what appears to be the international position with the E3 Commission. When you see all of the violations that were laid out in the report, and you see what the report said about the transitional justice mechanism being more of a more designed to protect the status quo of impunity than to protect victims, you have to wonder what the long game is for the U.S. and the rest of the international community. How much of this are they going to watch and not do anything about, or try to do some sort of memorializing after the fact and wring their hands about all these terrible things that have happened? This is going to be a liability for the international community. I mean, of course, the primary victim in all of this are the actual victims of these atrocities that have had the door of justice slammed in their face, and the people who are right now vulnerable throughout Ethiopia, in just about every region of Ethiopia where there's violence, where the state is cracking down on people, where they're arresting people, killing people, civilians, as Faisal was talking about, where they're killing children, pregnant women, attacking IDP camps. These are the victims of this decision. If the United States, the international community, which it seems like they're poised to do, allows the E3 Commission to expire, it's going to send a chilling message that Abi's going to hear loud and clear. Every petty tyrant's going to hear loud and clear that all you have to do is say no. Just say no and drag your feet when it comes to human rights, and there's nothing that the multilateral system can do about it. And that's a very dangerous situation. So what happens next in Ethiopia, like you said, I wouldn't be able to predict, but what I know is that outside scrutiny of what happens next will not be there. That the ability for the United States, for the European Union, for the United Nations to actually have an objective analysis of human rights violations that are being committed, that's going to be gone. What you're going to have are organizations doing reports, of course, Amnesty International, human rights groups, they've been great about this, but they don't carry the same weight. You'll also see, some when a tragedy happens that rises to the level of response from the international community, you'll see probably a condemnation, probably a lot of statements of concern that don't do much good. But what's going to happen next in Ethiopia is going to be something that we're not going to be able to influence, do anything. Not that we've been able to influence it too much right now, because we've sort of let the E3 Commission die a natural death. They only got their staff in March of this year, and it seems that we're poised to let this expire here in September. So it's a very bad situation. Whatever comes next is going to be more brutal, more deadly, and is going to target civilians more likely, based on the fact that we let the E3 Commission die, if it is allowed to expire. Sorry, I was taking your job for a second.
Great. I'm so happy because I was kicked out. I don't know why, but
No.
you guys know how to take over. That's great. So I will come back to Faisal. Thank you, Gail. Thank you, Duke, for that. Faisal, on one of the arguments from the government and what others are justifying, like European Union and so on, is using the domestic transitional justice mechanism. But the Commission was clear about that in terms of Ethiopia is not, yes, it's a sovereign country and can have its own process and so on, but this is beyond its capability. So, I mean, given we don't know, like Duke said, whether this would be renewed or not. What are you seeing in terms of the justice issues? But also, we don't see a lot of push from Maqala on this, at least at the government capacity. The article I was showing before, this is from 2021, October, almost 2 years ago to the day. This is by Mark Lowcock, who was at that time the deputy, I think he was the assistant general secretary of the UN for humanitarian issues. So he saw firsthand how the leadership at Arakilo was dealing with all these issues and so on. So he had to write this, how to destroy a country. Does Ethiopia have a future? So 2 years later, things seem to be, expanding to every corner of the country. So take us into the domestic mechanisms that has been, under a lot of PR versus what this international commission could have done, given it was allowed to renew its mandate.
Yeah, thank you. And Duke seized the moment to make sure that the house doesn't fall apart. So thank you.
Ethiopia needs that, right?
Absolutely. So I think both Scale and Duke really touched the issue of the international and their role and their self-imposed limitation on their role. Self-limitation in the sense that for 2 years they were watching when the Tigray war was getting to the proportion that we can no longer even rationalize, in addition to blockade of the region, so food and medicine. So what we see now in the tallies that Duke shared with us is the after effect. We've been calling the international to at least lift the siege, to at least have people in. So that really tells you that the international organization will bend its back if even Red Kilo and the insiders of Addis Ababa accept even minimum request from the international. But you have, as Scale, eloquently always described the mood of Red Kilo. You have an opaque kind of mentality in Red Kilo that would not listen to anything. So with that, I think the report is damning. If, as a planner, if I really look at that report, it is the harshest findings that an international agency like the UN team can make. Basically saying the war in Tigray continues despite the Pretoria Agreement. The Pretoria Agreement was not implemented. People are still being killed. Eritrea is still a player, although we told Eritrea a year ago to get out. Part of the agreement with the federal government was to ensure that they ask Eritrea to leave the country in Tigray, and they have not to mention the fact that they doubled it down. So it's in plain sight that the whole secret is out there. So one would ask, then why is the international community talking about a transitional justice when we are talking about a government that's doubling it down and eroding the mechanism for the cessation of hostility that we signed a year ago? I think we need to go deeper into the philosophy of how does the West see the so-called transitional justice? At the end of the day, for the West and diplomatic corpses of the United States and England and Germany and all that, transitional justice applied to the third world country is a tool for quote-unquote democratization. That's ultimately the liberal thinking of transitional justice. I'm sorry, I'm in a bad location today. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's really the international community saying, we like to work with Red Kilo and Abiy and his team, but we want it to do minimum. And the whole year that they were writing the report was to really investigate to what degree Red Kilo is ready to even accommodate the soft landing of a report like this. And this report came out after they realized that the Ethiopian government is not showing any letdown, any compromise, on top of that, the Tigray war started, the Oromia war is really if you want to call a war a hidden war, in my opinion, the Oromia war is the hidden war for whatever reason. People are not vocal. The geography is big. We don't know, but it's a hidden war. And when you talk to people or reports, little reports come out, they are as ugly as anyone. So I think now you see this movement with the Amara, Fano just rapidly catching international attention. Then this report comes out and literally gives Abiy and his team a very, very finding that they may be able to say, what do we need to do? I don't think Abiy will come and say, I want to participate the transitional justice, because the 4 points I just took down while we were talking, the 4 criteria that they are now wanting to evaluate was victim's right to truth, victims' rights to justice, and victims' rights to reparation, and guarantees of non-repetition of abuses. This is the generic bullet points that transitional justice give. I don't think they expect any reparation for the Tigray, people who have no point of return at this point in time. And I said this long time ago in this show, it will take ages and generations to really recover from what had happened. The same in Oromia, particularly in Western Welaga and that part of the area, where bombardment is done secretly and in a cover. The same could happen in Oromia. So I think the world is at a loss, but they have tools. They have very strong tools to bring Abiy and team to their knees if they so desire. The loans are there, the aid that they give is there. An option is to invite the opposition groups to a round table of discussion and seek, some of the solution from these opposition groups, including Tigray. And I don't want to be very harsh on Tigray administration and TPLF at this particular time, although I have a lot of misgivings, simply because Getachew, the corner they are being pinned down at this point in time, really gives them not that much option except to make their case to the international world and use them as their protectorate until things move. But I think for their silence, in my opinion, and I think I heard one time my colleague Skial eloquently expressing how they are cleverly and intelligently choosing their choices on the table at this particular time. So I understand your frustration with what they're doing, but I think that, we don't need to gaslight what TDF and Tigray administration at this point in time are going. They have issues, they have problems, but maybe there will be a right time to put them. So with that, I think the West have a lot of options. I'll be a team of people who will be going to DC next week. And part of that will be to show some light as to what the options are for the United States to work with its citizens who are from that region to address some of the issues, and hopefully they will get some sympathetic ears to those issues.
Thank you, Faisal, for that. To your point, this is Tigray officials writing a letter to the federal government in Addis, asking for redesigning the transitional justice model, because they were the latecomers in all this. It was designed and developed in the absence of Tigray, but of course there were also many sectors of the country, including the Somali region, Council for Somali Cause, all that, reacting and reflecting on how this might not work. Okay, so we are very close to the last segment. You can reflect on other panelists' reflection as you wish, but maybe the last segment is, what is your final thought? Again, like you said, it's very hard to predict what might come, but all of you have been excellent in terms of providing your insight on what should be done and what should be wary of and so on. So, Skell, your final thoughts and reflection.
Well, I mean, when this Tigray Commission was established, we had a discussion here and did not expect that it's going to deliver a report such as it did last week. I think it was a report that confirmed what we already knew, that the Ethiopian National Defense Force, the Eritrean Defense Force, the Amhara Regional Special Forces, and including the TDF have committed, they say, crimes, war crimes and crimes against humanity. And they have documented that. They have shown that mass killings of civilians, actually, they make a point of using this word called